Why do I want to become a teacher? It's not that I don't know the answer, it's that the answer is not linear. And the biggest problem is my timing is a little bit strange. I grew up in an incredibly beautiful part of Australia on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and I went to public schools, public primary school, public high school, and I'm tremendously thankful for the education I got. Some of my teachers did their training in the city, then they moved north away from family, and back in those days, it's 8-10 hours by road, and they put down roots and they built houses and they had kids and they settled down there, and some of them have retired there. So they really invested in taking their education that they'd received into the bush to give other people an education. There was nothing half-hearted about the quality of the education I received. I was at Bunnings recently and I needed a scribing tool because I'm doing a project around the house and I wanted to mark out something, and I'd been needing a scribing tool for a long time to sort of gouge muck and stuff out of stuff that I wanted to paint over and spack fill and then paint. And I didn't have one. I'm like, I need a tool. So I went to Bunnings and nobody knew what a scribing tool was. I could not believe it. The person in charge of the tool shop, they've got a special cashier there. You have to go to your tool shop and buy the tools and then leave the tool shop. You can't just take it to the front desk. No idea what one was. A couple of kids behind the information desk, very helpful. They found it for me in the computer, but they didn't know what it was. They're like, how do you spell this? I'm like, you spell it the way you think you spell it, scribe. What is this? It's a pencil. I learned what a scribing tool was in Year 8 metalwork at Bellingen High School. Now that is a great education. We had great English teachers. They would recite Chaucer in a Middle English accent. It was hilarious. My math teacher, Mr. Healy, I think his name was, Year 11 and Year 12, he would rewrite all of his teaching notes every year, copy them from one folder to another folder, rewrite all his sort of material. He didn't have to do that. He did it because if there was just a chance that he could inject 1 or 2% of extra quality into the way he was teaching his students the next year, he would totally do it. Oh man, amazing. All of my teachers were like this. So there's nothing second class about the education I received. Quite the contrary. When I was still living at home, my mum said to me, I think you'd make a great teacher. And at the time, my attitude was, Mum, what would you know? But at the same time, there was this sort of existential pull on my brain to go, education's not worth anything. Education's bad. Teachers are leeches on the economy, right? And I didn't even know that those voices were sort of happening in my head until my own kids were in school. I was brought up in a family that sort of valued education at the same time as looking down its nose a long way at teachers. Remember one time I went on an excursion and my dad drove us along. He told the English master what he thought about Shakespeare and King Lear, and it was incredibly disparaging. And I was so embarrassed because I'm like, Shakespeare is a towering intellect. He's got fantastic insight into the human condition. He writes really well. People still read his words hundreds of years later. And there's a reason for this. And the quote about Shakespeare is really rather good in spite of some of the people who like him. We were taught not to be overly ambitious about our plans for our future, particularly in regards as academia was concerned, and that was because we grew up in a church that was very fundamentalist and believed the end of the world was coming, and some of the members of the church believed in UFOs, and it was kind of crazy, and we were taught to be very dismissive of what was called head knowledge and be very interested in what was called heart knowledge, which we believed to be spirituality. I could go down a great big rabbit hole of that sort of Gnostic sort of heretical tendency. It is symptomatic of a certain way of thinking, which is very closed-minded. The longer I've been away from that context and the further I've gone in my journey as a student of lifelong learning, I've realised that it really constrains your future. That was why I wasn't thinking about education when I was growing up in high school. I finished school and my dad chose a course for me that I really didn't want to do. He didn't give me the option, and so I ended up going and doing this degree, which I didn't complete. Got very depressed, I didn't like it, and I spent a lot of time then just going, well, what do I really want to do with my life? While I did that, I fell into graphic design and I quite enjoyed it. Then I married, I had kids, and I started to get my head back in the game, get my mojo back in place. Started to think about what would I like to do academically. It wasn't even really what I want to do as a career. It was more like I like thinking, I like understanding concepts. I'm beginning to really enjoy explaining them to people in my workplace as well. So I was a graphic designer, but what I really enjoyed doing was helping other graphic designers to understand how to use their software and how to lay out a page and which typefaces to choose and why that mattered. And along the way, I picked up some studies in theology, which I really enjoyed, and that sort of fed my interest in the liberal arts and literature and philosophy and sort of anthropological concepts. And then I did a couple of Cert 4s in sales, marketing and training. And then I found a master's degree, which was in design. And that was good because I'd been a graphic designer for almost 20 years by that stage, and I didn't really see the marginal benefit in going back and doing an undergraduate degree, whereas a master's degree was a different idea altogether, and so that was more around management concepts and design as a process rather than a product. Halfway through that degree, I had an epiphany, and I thought, Graham, if you're getting HDs in a master's degree, don't you think you might possibly not fail an undergraduate degree in a completely different area of life if you wanted to pivot? That whole process, to the point where I decided, hey, it would be cool to pivot now, was north of 25 years. Teachers don't deliver anything of quality. You learn how to teach because you can't get a real job, right? Like, that stuff had been said when I was a kid. And I'm like, teachers are awesome. And look at what they're doing with my kid. And they're in a group of 20, 25, 30 kids sometimes a whole day, and they don't lose their cool. And the kids don't get bored. How do you even do that? Plus, kids learn things, and then they get through year 6 and they get to high school, and then you've got specialist teachers. And I'm like, it's hard to be a teacher. You've got to get a degree or maybe 2 degrees. And so I had to gently become aware that I had this sort of thinking in my head that was complete rubbish. But I was in my 30s before I realised I had this sort of anchor of thoughts just sort of pulling me backwards. From there, it was this slow pivot, which took about maybe 7 or 8 years. And then I'm like, actually, I would like to be one of those people. I really respect them. I think what they're doing is difficult. It's clearly incredibly valuable. And my wife by that stage had become a teacher, and she was really loving it. And she's like, goodness, could you just do education? You'd really love that. You're good at explaining things. So many people had started to say that. I'm like, okay, maybe they're not all wrong. So I just gently picked up a couple of units in an online education degree, and I'm doing that through Southern Cross University. And I finished off the master's degree and then chipped away a bit more at the Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Education, which is what I'm still doing now as I'm recording this video in early 2020. So long story short, I'm a career graphic designer. I've already got a master's degree, but I'm now going back to uni to get a double undergraduate degree. Along the way, of course, I've done a little bit of prac, and I've started to work with kids, and I've found it's just incredibly stimulating intellectually for me, and I really enjoy the process. And I think you'll hear this from a lot of teachers and pre-service teachers. I love seeing the lights come on for kids. What that means is I love being able to work with them, help find out what's the point of need that they have in their educational journey, and just go, right, that's where we're going to start. And then you go further along from there and take them to somewhere further along than where they thought they could get to that day. That's tremendously satisfying. So already I'm thinking this is a good decision. It's more, how did it take you so long, rather than why do you want to be a teacher? Hope you've enjoyed that, and leave a comment in the feed.